The knock came at midnight. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the small apartment like gunshots. Heinrich Müller, who had been dozing in his armchair, newspaper still clutched in his hands, awoke with a start. His wife, pallid with fear, reached for his hand across the darkness. They both knew. The neighbors across the hall had disappeared last week. The Jewish family downstairs, gone the week before. Now it was their turn. The Gestapo had arrived. In the smoldering aftermath of Germany's defeat in World War I, amid the economic devastation of the Weimar Republic and the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, dark forces were gathering strength. When Adolf Hitler seized power in 1933, one of his first priorities was the consolidation of absolute control. On April 26, 1933, Hermann Göring, then serving as Minister of the Interior of Prussia, established the secret state police, eventually known as simply the Gestapo. The Gestapo's birth represented something profoundly new and terrifying in modern statecraft, writes historian Richard J. Evans. It was the institutionalization of terror as a means of governance. What began as a small Prussian police department would evolve into one of history's most feared organizations, an invisible octopus with tentacles that reached into every aspect of German life. Initially comprising just a few hundred employees, by the height of World War II, the Gestapo had grown to approximately 45,000 officers and agents, with tens of thousands more informants embedded throughout German society. The haunting headquarters at 8 Prince Albrecht Strasse in Berlin stood as a concrete manifestation of abstract terror. The imposing structure, with its long corridors and sterile interrogation rooms, became synonymous with disappearance and death. Many who entered never emerged. Those who did were forever changed. The genius of the Gestapo system, notes Holocaust historian Deborah Lipstadt, was that it rendered the architecture of terror largely invisible. Most Germans never saw a concentration camp. The true violence happened behind closed doors, in cellars, in distant facilities. This invisibility allowed for plausible deniability among the general population. Against the backdrop of Germany's efficient bureaucracy, the Gestapo operated with clinical precision. Files were meticulously maintained, reports carefully typed and categorized. The machinery of repression hummed with administrative efficiency. Unlike the boisterous brown-shirted SA stormtroopers who had helped Hitler rise to power through street violence, the Gestapo operated in shadows. They dressed in ordinary civilian clothes. They drove unmarked vehicles. They blended into crowds. They could be anyone, anywhere, the shopkeeper, the postman, the teacher. This omnipresent invisibility generated a paralyzing psychological effect more powerful than any public display of force could achieve. Perhaps most terrifying was the Gestapo's position outside the bounds of legal restraint. After 1936, under the direction of Heinrich Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich, the organization was exempted from judicial review. Their actions could not be challenged in court. Their methods could not be questioned. They operated in what historians call a legal void, accountable only to themselves and Nazi leadership. The traditional safeguards that had evolved over centuries of jurisprudence were swept away virtually overnight, explains legal historian Michael Stolais. Where once there had been due process, now there was only the arbitrary power of the Gestapo. This represented not merely a change in law enforcement, but a fundamental redefinition of the relationship between the state and the individual. The weather-worn wooden desk in Gestapo officer Kurt Lischke's office belied the power he wielded. With a simple signature, he could condemn a person to interrogation, imprisonment, or death. No evidence was required beyond suspicion. No appeal was possible. As one survivor recounted, when they came for you, it was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed you whole. You ceased to exist as a person with rights. You became simply a problem to be solved. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of the Gestapo's operations was their cultivation of a society that policed itself. While the actual number of official Gestapo officers remained relatively small compared to the population they controlled, their effectiveness was multiplied exponentially by their network of informants. What made the Gestapo truly effective was not their own surveillance capabilities, which were limited, but the willingness of ordinary Germans to report on their neighbors, colleagues, friends, and even family members, notes historian Robert Gellertilly, whose research into Gestapo files revealed that approximately 80% of all cases began with denunciations from ordinary citizens. For a society already fractured by economic hardship and political polarization, the Gestapo provided a mechanism through which personal grievances could be addressed under the guise of patriotic duty. A neighbor's noisy radio might be reported as playing forbidden foreign broadcasts. A business competitor could be denounced for making anti-Nazi remarks. A troublesome in-law might be accused of racial contamination. The denunciations flowed in handwritten notes, anonymous letters, whispered accusations, creating a society where walls literally had ears and casual conversation became freighted with danger. Children were encouraged to report parents, employees to inform on employers, parishioners to expose clergy. As Nazi Germany expanded across Europe, the Gestapo followed, establishing offices in Paris, Warsaw, Prague, Amsterdam, and other conquered cities. Their methods, refined in Germany, were now applied with greater brutality in occupied territories. In the cobblestoned courtyards of ancient European capitals, the Gestapo's execution squads operated with mechanical efficiency. In the forests outside Eastern European villages, mass graves filled with those deemed enemies of the Reich. In makeshift prisons throughout the continent, interrogators employed techniques designed to break both body and spirit. Lesser known is the Gestapo's role in the Night and Fog Decree, the Nacht- und Nebel Directive issued by Hitler in December 1941. Under this policy, suspected resistance members in occupied territories would be arrested in the darkness of night and disappear into the fog, transported secretly to Germany, leaving families with no information about their fate. The psychological effect of these disappearances cannot be overstated, writes military historian Peter Longerich. It was designed specifically to create terror through uncertainty. The not knowing was often more psychologically devastating than confirmed death. The interrogation techniques employed by the Gestapo evolved from crude physical brutality to sophisticated psychological manipulation. While torture was common, particularly in the later war years, many Gestapo officers prided themselves on extracting confessions through intimidation and deception rather than physical abuse. Prisoners would be kept in isolation for days or weeks, then suddenly confronted with fabricated confessions from friends or family members. Sleep deprivation, extreme temperature exposure, and simulated executions broke down resistance. Some officers specialized in creating false hope, promising lenient treatment in exchange for information, only to renege once the intelligence was obtained. What we learn from examining Gestapo interrogation protocols, observes historian Edward Westerman, is that far from being merely sadistic thugs, many Gestapo officers were skilled psychologists who understood precisely how to dismantle human resilience. In the damp cellars of Gestapo facilities, the mechanisms of pain were applied with scientific precision. Survivors later described the methodical approach of their tormentors, the careful notation of responses, the calculated escalation of suffering, the clinical detachment as they observed their victims' breaking points. As Allied forces closed in on Berlin in the spring of 1945, the Gestapo engaged in frantic document destruction. Offices throughout Germany and occupied territories burned files, destroyed evidence, and eliminated witnesses. Many officers, aware of the atrocities they had committed, shed their uniforms and attempted to blend into the civilian population. Others committed suicide rather than face capture and potential prosecution. In the Nuremberg trials that followed Germany's defeat, the Gestapo was declared a criminal organization. Yet many of its members escaped justice. Some fled to South America or the Middle East under false identities. Others were recruited by Allied intelligence services for their expertise in anti-communist operations as the Cold War began. Still others simply returned to civilian life, their crimes undocumented or overlooked in the chaos of post-war reconstruction. The failure to bring many Gestapo perpetrators to justice represents one of the great moral failures of the post-war period, argues historian Deborah Dwork. Their victims received no closure, and the message sent was that such crimes might be committed with impunity under certain political conditions. The psychological wounds inflicted by the Gestapo outlived the organization itself. Survivors of interrogation often suffered lifelong trauma. Communities targeted by Gestapo operations took generations to rebuild trust. The very concept of police power was tainted in the public consciousness, requiring profound reforms in post-war Germany. Perhaps most disturbing is the realization that the Gestapo was not staffed by monsters, but by ordinary men who chose to participate in extraordinary evil. Studies of Gestapo personnel records reveal that most were career civil servants, police officers, and legal professionals who brought their existing skills to the machinery of repression. What troubles us most about the Gestapo, reflects philosopher Hannah Arendt, is not that they were inhuman, but that they were all too human. Their crimes reveal not the exception, but the potential that lies dormant in bureaucratic structures, disconnected from moral restraint. In the pre-dawn stillness of a Berlin street, an elderly man pauses by a small brass plaque embedded in the sidewalk, a Stolperstein or stumbling stone memorial. It bears the name of someone who once lived in the building before being taken by the Gestapo. He looks up at the renovated facade, now housing luxury apartments. Nothing remains of the terror except memory, and as the last survivors pass away, even that fades. The greatest triumph of the Gestapo may be that, for a new generation scrolling through social media on smartphones, the machinery of state terror seems like a distant historical curiosity rather than a warning. While across the world, in places less visible, midnight knocks continue to echo through darkened hallways.